Ladies and gentlemen, heartily welcome to Hill and Knowlton. This is a cooperation between the British Chamber of Commerce in Oslo and Hill and Knowlton. We also have, as we're being introduced later on, distinguished guests from other PR agencies present. I just want to roughly have just 2 or 3 points that I want to touch upon before handing it over in terms of Norwegian politics, where we are at the moment. Just briefly after an election, where is the political landscape currently? We have the most left-leaning parliament in my lifetime. We have a minority government, which was contrary to what most people at least thought would be the outcome of the election. You had a prime minister campaign basically on 3 success criteria. One is getting a new majority. Now that was given by the voters. A majority government, no. And the ability to see the Labour Party as by far the largest party, and that was also handed over by the voters. So those are the 3 main topics as today's prime minister campaign on. You have the Conservative Party having an 8-year history in government, being put in the driver's seat in opposition. But the big question for the next 4 years, are they going to be the most vocal opposition party of the many? And I would also like to talk about, and this is particularly for foreign journalists and internationals understanding the political landscape in Norway. What happened to the Green Wave? What happened to all those that believed a new voting bloc would cement itself in Parliament? What happened? Well, my answer to that is you don't understand the Norwegian political spectre. Because what's really happening here is the change is being led by industry instead of by NGOs or, for that matter, traditional green European parties. So we had a block of self-proclaimed environmentalist parties that is virtually stable. Whereas today's government would most likely have even higher ambitions in terms of climate and environmental policies. But when it comes to concrete action, our view is little will change. Industry will still be the driving force in terms of green and more environmental change. So those are some of my initial remarks. Let me just end with one. So I have to introduce, I have a conservative background. So I used to be a member of parliament for the Conservative Party. And of course, my view on the world is tainted by that. But it should be said, touching upon the Labour Party, that there is a bit of an existential threat being discussed, being in the air. When you do look upon international and European politics at the moment, you'll see that proud, large, traditionally large social democratic parties have just disappeared. You have France, where they're roughly at 5%. You have the Czech Republic, where they went below the threshold after being the largest party back in 2013. You have the Netherlands, where the Social Democrats have been a large and governing party over decades, and there it's at 5%. So being now a Labour-led government in Norway is, in that regard, a tremendous achievement. And you also have the Swedes, where they are the driving force in politics. So the Nordics might be a little bit of an anomaly in that sense, that you also have a social democratic prime minister and in Denmark, and president in Finland. So that might also be something to elaborate on. So let me then introduce today's moderator, Håkon Boiro. He represents, in this instance, the Chamber of Commerce here. So over to you.
All these issues later, I promise. I'm so old, so I need to use my glasses every so often, and so bear with me. I just have to say first that we don't usually do all male panels, but sometimes that just happens. I just want to stress that, but you know, be assured we have great minds here, and I'm going to introduce them to you now. You heard from Peter Gittmark. He's, of course, a bit modest, but he served as a member of parliament for the Conservative Party for 12 years, and making him the youngest ever candidate to be re-elected from southern Norway. So that's pretty impressive. Today he leads the Public Affairs Department here at the Gambit Hill in Knowlton. And then we have Richard Milne. He's from Financial Times, Nordic and Baltic Bureau Chief of Financial Times. Thank you for coming. Håkon Knudsen, Labour politician. You still?
No, I used to be.
Used to be. Used to be a political advisor for the Labour Party, advisor for the deputy mayor here in Oslo, and advisor for former Labour youth leader Eskil Pedersen, now works for Wergeland Apenes. And then Odd Hoen Sevje, who's been an advisor to Erna Solberg, both in parliament and in government for many, many years, and he's now a partner at First House. So that was the panel. So we're going to get to grips with the big questions straight away. On Wednesday, the new government presented its new political platform, 80 pages on health, oil, school, digitalization, climate, and everything else. So what I would like to hear from you guys, is there anything in the platform that you found particularly surprising or interesting, or where's the wow factor in this platform? So it's your colleagues, maybe you should start, Håkon.
Well, probably the biggest, we'll say, finding in the Hurdalserklæringen in the declaration is that there are no huge wow moments. It's a pretty steadfast and some would say gray and bland declaration, which is clearly a sign that, of course, both the Centre Party and the Labour Party are preparing for a battle in Parliament, and especially the Labour Party has left a lot of the red and the green out of the declaration, and are thinking of how they're going to face with the socialist left and the left side of Parliament when they're going to negotiate the budget and when they're going to move forward. And I think you can see this both in the platform, but also in who they elected and chose to become the different ministers. When you see both the Centre Party and also, or especially the Centre Party, but also the Labour Party has left some of their, let's call them the big guns, back in Parliament to take care of the negotiations and take care of the political manufacturing in Parliament. And so I think both the declaration and also the new government that we saw got elected a few days ago is a clear statement that they're both preparing for tough years in Parliament.
Thank you very much. We're going to get back to the battle. The Parliament is not as vocal as it is in England, but it's still interesting. So we're going to get back to that. I forgot to say, I've actually given these guys a couple of minutes to elaborate on any issue they would like to, and I kind of hijacked you now, so if you have something else to say later on, I'll give you extra time. Odd, your turn. What is your take on this new election?
Actually, we've got a historic government in Norway. We have a minority coalition government in which Labour is a part of. We've never had that before. Either they've been alone as a minority government, or they've been in a coalition that secured a majority in Parliament, which meant that whatever the ministers agreed on, it would simply be passed in Parliament. So this is a whole new situation for Labour, and it's a very familiar situation for the Centre Party. And speaking of the big guns, I suggest that the Centre Party left bigger guns in Parliament than Labour did, which means that they're preparing a lot more for the big issues in Parliament, and Labour is preparing more for the day-to-day governing in government, which is quite interesting to see. And when it comes to the platform, I'd like to say that what struck me is that Labour's worldview when it comes to energy politics, climate and industry really won. It won the day because it's basically a template of what Labour said all through the campaign, that you need to have an energy surplus in Norway to ensure low energy prices for the new mainland industry that we are going to build as the oil and gas becomes less important in the economy. So the narrative one, I'm not as sure if the politics are going to win, because there are some details that are going to be quite difficult to hash out. So they're betting a lot on offshore wind, if that's going to be enough, or if they have to somehow solve the problem with land-based wind, remains to be seen. But that's going to be quite interesting to see in the coming months.
Also a topic we're going to get back to, onshore versus offshore wind. Richard, I talked to you before this debate, and you actually told me that Norwegian politics is quite boring. Or you didn't say boring, you said uninteresting. So, why is that?
Well, I think if you, so I covered all 8 Nordic and Baltic countries. If I take it from the international perspective, you know, there are no big debates here, there are no big arguments. If I look Sweden's elections next year, you know, sort of much more to get your teeth into in terms of, you know, crime, immigration, integration as big issues. I mean, it's been said, I met an advisor for Anna Solberg on the election night, and he said, oh, you international journalists said it was the climate election. I think you're completely wrong. And to answer, I don't think we were wrong. I think, you know, out of the poor buffet of topics, really, that was that was the one with the most meat on the bone, in a sense. But it doesn't mean that you know, if it is a climate election, that the Green parties should do well. And I think actually there, if you look in the region, if you look at the Swedish Green Party, they have a much broader policy program. The Norwegian Green Party was very narrow and focused on one issue, and made, you know, some tactical errors, as I think, you know, the ultimatum on the Endo exploration was not a good idea. Also internationally, it was interesting for us to see, you know, we think of the Nordics as this sort of bastion of social democracy. This is a bit cheating because you have to include Iceland, but the last time there were 5 left-leaning prime ministers was 1959 in the Nordics at the same time. So that's pretty striking, but I actually think, probably, you know, the story in the Nordics in recent years is that it isn't the rise of or the revival of the centre-left. I think it's the rise of the centre-right as a proper government alternative for me. And I think that's probably, for at the end, the election just becomes a story that 8 years of Conservative rule in Norway is probably enough, and it's time for a change. But it wasn't a terribly inspiring change, it felt, you know. But you know, and I think you said, you know, you asked for the UK. I wouldn't say any big change, but I suspect the UK is pretty happy that their interconnector opened last week, because it doesn't look like giving me too many more of those built.
So, not very inspiring. And Peter, the political platform, where is how can we be excited about this? What's the story? Where are the political cases? What are we going to talk about in the next 4 years?
Oh, Norwegian politics is going to be really interesting over the next 4 years. And I would say seriously so, because the most important part about the platform is not the 80 pages itself. It's the level of detail that's lacking. It's all the problems that the government, in making the manifesto, is really just putting ahead of itself. Because so many of the issues are dealt with, we're going to look into, we're going to propose, but we don't know what, and it's going to be solved by money, more money. And if you use that in combination with what I think is the most interesting part reading the platform, is just a complete disregard from the Socialist Left Party. The party they need as a help to bring the majority is just out of the platform entirely. This is a platform being written as if the Centre Party and the Labour Party had a majority, the two, but they don't. So the platform we've seen now being introduced to us is not what Parliament will end up voting through as policy. It's just a piece of the puzzle on its way to something that will be molded by Parliament and really disfigured by the Socialist Left Party. So they're going to have a field day. So my expectation is Norwegian politics is going to be real interesting over the next 4 years.
See? Plenty of things to write about.
Well, I wouldn't disagree. I think if I was a Norwegian journalist, I'd be incredibly excited. As an international one, less so. You know, the sort of explaining the socialist left versus whatever. The slalom shirting is difficult, let's say. But I think, you know, I mean, there's definitely, if I was looking internationally, you know, reverting to the climate election, it's still reconciling the, you know, Western Europe's biggest petroleum producer and the green transition. It's just a huge debate. There's so much international interest on it, whether it's electric cars and, you know, the change in VAT for the highest car. I mean, things like that. There's going to be a lot of international interest around the speed. You know, can they get through oil politics without having to go to the left? What happens in the Barents Sea? I mean, speaking to Labour, I spoke to Espen Barth Eide on the night of the elections. He sort of said, well, you know, Barents Sea is kind of given up. No, so I think there's a lot to play for.
Okay, you're all former politicians, so I don't need to explain the rules in a debate here, so you know, fingers up and everything. Or go ahead.
I think what's interesting looking at the platform and whether or not it disregards the socialist left, it kind of depends on whether you read it as the Centre Party or the Labour Party. Because for Labour, I think that they figure most of these things they'd like to form a majority with the socialist left on. And in terms of budget, whatever requires money to actually execute must be done in the budget with the Socialist Left Party. But that leaves them a whole lot of politics where they can do the slalomkjøring or find different majorities in Parliament, which is probably exactly the plan the Centre Party has. And that's where I think we will see a really interesting dynamic between Labour and the Centre Party in the next 4 years. Because for Labour, going too often to the right is difficult, and for the Centre Party, going too often to the left is difficult. So they're going to grind against each other for 4 years about where to seek a majority. And that's a whole different situation from what the former government had, because they had their defined parties, which they were going to form a majority in Parliament with. It was just a question of how long did they have to negotiate. So the dynamic is quite different from anything we've seen before. And I remember I worked in the Parliament during the last government, and part of the tactic between the parties in government, which were then the Socialist Left Party, the Centre Party, and the Labour Party, were leaks in the press in order to impact processes ongoing in government. So if we start seeing that now, quickly, I think that the trust between the government parties will deteriorate quite quickly. And then, yeah, you can get a really interesting parliamentary situation.
It's called good journalism.
I think that working relationship is important as well, because when after 8 years of Erna Solberg, her ministers or her people closely linked to her from other parties all touch upon her people skills, her skills as a leader. And that would be extremely important for today's Prime Minister as well, to establish that, to make sure there is trust in the entire circle of political friends.
But he's a former diplomat.
But it's completely different because in diplomacy, champagne and canapes are more important than it is in politics, where a dagger is the tool most commonly used. And of course, going into a government with the Centre Party that has spent so much of the election campaign not talking down the Conservative Party, but more enthusiastically talking down the Labour Party and its policies. So you saw the biggest smiles on the Centre Party mouths when they thrashed the Labour Party and the rest of the left, so they're governing coalition partners. And
But
that's...
if I could just stop you there. So are you saying now, that just to make sure I understand correctly, that when you're part of a government, you're part of a decision-making machine that continuously making decisions all the time? Are you saying you don't think Støre has the personal capacities to lead that?
I think he can be a great prime minister. I think he has all the possibilities of doing that. But I'm not entirely certain it will play out like that. I think he has difficult friends. I think there is not enough trust between senior members of the Centre Party and the Labour Party. I think looking back to 2013, when the Progress Party and the Conservative Party joined government, that had been work in progress over years. It would not have taken place if Carl I. Hagen had been the leader of the Progress Party. It had taken place because Siv Jensen and Erna Solberg trusted each other and saw that we can both benefit from being in government. So this could be seen from the outside a little like what people are campaigning on now, to get away from forced marriages. It looks a little like that.
So we all know that the Labour Party is not the Sunday school. So what do you think when he says that? Are you confident this will play out well? Do we have two friends in government now, or do they really hate each other guts already?
No, definitely not. I think Hurdal and the whole process going up at Hurdal, creating the Hurdalsplattformen in the past few weeks has shown that I think Trygve Slagsvold Vedum and also Jonas Gahr Støre have established a really good consensus. I think it's more worrying that Audun Lysbakken went out and has been several weeks now by himself in Parliament without talking to Trygve and Jonas. But also I just want to stress the part that yes, the Centre Party is a different party now than they were 10 years ago. And also the Labour Party has gone through several changes. But still, both the Centre Party and the Labour Party are two, alongside the Conservative Party, two of the three parties in Norway with the longest history and tradition of governing in Norway. These are parties that know how to govern. This is not their young sailors going on their first voyage. This is two parties that knows what it means to be in government, and they believe in the power of being in government and controlling the status quo and controlling the political narrative. So I think it's not wise to underestimate the Centre Party and the Labour Party and how they are going to navigate. And also, and you just see the Centre Party in Parliament have put Marit Arnstad, they have put Geir Pollestad, they have built a team around their group in Parliament, so they're ready to maneuver every day and be an operative government that wins those battles in Parliament to make sure that the government keeps progressing and moving forward.
Can I just explain? I know we have foreign guests here, and no, I have to explain. Norway is a very small country, so when he says Trygve, that's actually Trygve Slagsvold Vedum, and he's the leader of Centre Party and our new finance minister. And when he says Jonas, that's our prime minister. And yeah, that's what he said, Trygve and Jonas.
Yeah.
Just so
Apologies.
we're all on first name basis in Norway, so it's a bit difficult. Okay, I would like to get back to the battle of the parliament. There are a lot of guns in parliament talking to you guys, so we should stay away from parliament. But these are most of these guys here are business leaders. Politically, of course, interesting that you have a minority government and a lot of stuff will happen in parliament. But explain to these guys why it's also interesting for business. Anyone?
Well, first of all, it's because we have a minority coalition now. Of course, Parliament, everything is a lot more transparent. Everything happens in Parliament and the decision-making every day. We don't get the same situation that we had from 2005 to 2013 when there was a majority government and everything happened behind closed doors. And you had this group room number 5 or something when everyone sat and made all the major decisions. All the major decisions will happen in Parliament. And that's good news for anyone who have interests in their sector, who wants to influence and make sure that actions and policy changes that happen in Norway are done with the best possible information, and with all the relevant actors being able to make their case and to make the policies as best as possible. So I think the best news for all the business leaders who are interested in Norway is that policy changes will now happen in the open, on an open stage, with the ability to influence and be a part of that decision making, instead of having a majority government when everything is a lot more closed and happening behind closed doors in the government.
I think everything is not good and bad. It's in the grays you find most of the details, and I think you're absolutely right in terms of the positive thing is most of the deliberations, most of the debate will take place in the open. It will be in Parliament. The negative side to it is because it's taking place in Parliament, because it's being deliberations with the Socialist Left Party, and in particular dealing with the budget, the time frame they have to debate and make a budget after it's being proposed by government is within days or weeks at tops. And that means that some of the larger policy changes will take place after not enough scrutiny by civil servants. And we saw that in particularly in the period from 97 to 2000 under Bondevik I, where you had some of the largest tax changes and fees and levies changed virtually overnight, because they sat on top of a hotel and deliberated on a budget. Those were changed just afterwards, or within months and a few years afterwards, because not enough time and detail had gone into it. There is a fear that some of the same will happen this time over, that Parliament cannot have the full picture. That's up to the civil servants. And when politicians get together and find common ground, they often disregard some of the very important loopholes that they create by policy. And that is both an opportunity for business, but it is also a possibility for heartache to come.
I think we should also mention here that especially when things are decided in Parliament, different organizations have a large impact on what the parties want to do. And the situation now is that Labour obviously listens closely to the Labour unions. The Centre Party listens closely to the, let's call them, agrarian organizations and local mayors and organizations that represent those in different constellations. And you have the Socialist Left Party, who listens a lot to the climate organizations, but somewhat also to the labor unions. And there's the whole shebang with the Red Party as well, which is an interesting dynamic when the Red Party and the Socialist Left Party seem to be kind of merging a little bit together right now in proposing politics before Parliament. But I think that anyone who wants to understand what happens in Parliament right now should also focus very closely on what those organizations demand from the parties in power, because the influence has changed when government changed. The business confederations were a lot stronger, obviously, with the former government than they are now. So the bi-weekly meeting between the labor leadership and the labor unions is going to, I don't know if you have, is that where the phrase "someone talked together" originated? Yeah.
Yes.
That's a phrase in Norwegian politics. Someone talk together, and they do it about every 2 weeks. So get to know the labor unions.
So when someone talks, we should pay attention. Okay, well, we're going to dive into what you always have to dive into when you talk about Norwegian politics, which is oil, gas, and now renewables. So the energy sector. I just would like to say that I am going to turn over like this every so often, and if you have questions, just give me a little wink, and I'll catch you on a bit later on. Okay. So Norway is a net exporter of electricity, but today we have the highest electricity prices for many years, and it's going to be a horrible winter for all poor Norwegians. At the same time, we have a big discussion in Norway. Are we going to keep looking for oil and gas? Are we going to stop looking for oil and gas? Are we going to build more interconnectors to the UK or anywhere else in the world, or should we not? So the whole energy sector is it's a really hot political topic, and always has been in Norway. But are we going to see any big changes now with the new government, or is this just hot air in the platform? Rich, I want to start with you. What's the international perspective of this?
Well, as I say, the international perspective is this, maybe, and the oil fund are the two areas that matter. I don't know. For me, it seems that, as I started to mention at the end, that there is some sort of low-hanging fruit if the government did want to take a sort of environmental tack. You see, for instance, the Barents Sea, in the Arctic. Equinor, Aker BP, a lot of oil companies have left there. You see that there could be something the government says to sort of leave that area more or less behind for exploration. I mean, I think that would be quite a big move, but I don't see it necessarily on the cards. I think for me it's also that if you look around the region, if I look at Denmark and Sweden, I see two countries really doing a lot on the green transition. In Denmark, you've got Ørsted, the world's largest offshore wind farm developer. You've got Vestas, one of the biggest turbine manufacturers. In Sweden, you've got this huge movement in the north of Sweden now for green batteries, green steel, more than that. And I think Norway has to do something to. At the moment, I see sort of a lot of subsidies, say, for electric cars, or the electricity sales with interconnectors. But you want to have something that brings in jobs, and I think that's the challenge for the government. I don't really hear any big ideas around that.
Wake up and smell the coffee. The Chinese are coming, or
well, the other Nordics are coming. I think I think you've got to make business out of this green shift as well, not just not just passively watch the oil debate, because I think if you try and time it too much, the danger is that Norway gets it wrong, that maybe it happens faster, slower, I don't know, than expected.
We see that as of now, at least with the platform and the election promises, there are lots of hot air. There are lots of rhetoric here. We're yet to see the practical solutions come out of politics. And understanding Norwegian politics, energy is of high importance. We have a sovereign wealth fund which is above 1,000 trillion pounds. So it's sizable. We've always relied on, as long as I've been alive, at least politically active, the revenue stream from the oil and gas sector. And over the less than a decade, there has been a shift, in particularly by the left, where they see those revenue streams as something that should be either stopped or changed dramatically, at least. And it's often being done with a picture that you could take a worker in the petroleum industry and just give him a different job. Well, the sense says you get 4 to 5 times more in terms of taxation from a worker in the petroleum industry than you'll get in most other industries. So it really isn't a 1-to-1 ratio, it's maybe a 4 to 5 ratio when it comes to revenue stream. And that is very important, understanding how at least part of the right is looking upon this at the moment. The second interesting point is energy is of interest apart from oil and gas as well, because we have lots of hydropower. About 99% of what comes out of that socket over there in terms of electricity production is hydropower. It's renewable. And it's nearly all publicly owned. You have a system where if you talk about hydropower, it's really a system where either the state controls it or the municipality controls it directly or indirectly.
So what are you saying? We've done the transition to the green economy already?
Part of it. Part of it is by sheer luck. Part of it was, well, the Germans came to Norway in the late 1900s, early 2000s, and they watched our waterfalls, they got fascinated, and not long after you saw German engineers come up here and build our dams and our reservoirs, taking that into electricity production. So that was sheer luck. But it has also been by wise politics. It's also been done because there had been foresight by politicians. And I fear that some of that foresight is lacking at the moment, both because we cannot live on 1,000 trillion pounds forever, even though that is a massive amount of money. There needs to be a revenue stream that is roughly equal to the spending. And when you talk about energy, that is often not part of the discussion.
If you look at last month, or September, I think, we had an all-time high of oil and gas export income to Norway, with, of course, the high gas prices in Europe, but also because of there's right now approximately $80 per barrel. The oil price is very high. So I think, and if you look at the revenue created from that, it's approximately 85 billion Norwegian kroner in income for Norway in just 1 month. In comparison, that's what Norway makes from seafood exports through an entire year. So that's the big part of the Norwegian economy that are oil and gas, and that's of course the Hurdals platform and the Center Party and the Labour Party have said pretty steadily that they won't change basically anything of Norway's oil and gas policy right now. So the question is, how should Jonas Gahr Støre, the Prime Minister, and also the new Minister of Trade and Industry and Businesses, Jan Christian Vestre, and how we're going to use this revenue to create new industries within hydrogen power, within battery, and of course offshore wind that Odd mentioned, I think is going to be vital for the next 10, 15 years for Norway, especially because we've seen the level of conflict when it comes to onshore wind. Then you had these major conflicts the past 5 years in Norway, when you have municipalities, you have local organizations blocking almost any initiative when it comes to onshore wind. So I think it remains to be seen, but I think that Jonas Gahr Støre and the Labour Party especially, their plan is to, I expect to see vast amount of money going into these new industries, and especially offshore wind. And they haven't said that much about it yet, but I have at least high expectations of our new Minister for Trade and Businesses, Jan Christian Vestre, and Peter spoke about visionary leaders. I think he could easily be one of those visionary leaders to actually bring Norway into the green shift for the next 4 years, as he's both passionate and competent, and I think he would want to lead such a change into those new industries.
So if these guys want to follow the money,
offshore wind.
Offshore wind. Follow the money, offshore wind.
Well, I was just going to say as an aside, I haven't checked the figures recently, but when you said 99% that comes out is hydropower, when I checked, it was a year or two ago, it's something like 2/3 actually, because so much is sold abroad, and I think you can see now that potentially that's a big topic for this winter, on the mix of and what's sold. And I think you also see that with maybe offshore, with any of these green policies. I think there's a lesson from France of the Gilets jaunes of not wanting to offend consumers, and I think also in Norway you've obviously got the city versus the district argument with the centre party. I think, you know, I mean, what's going to happen with petrol prices? I just think it's going to be interesting to see, you know, the rhetoric on the green shift versus the protection of individuals. Interested to watch it.
I'd like to start out by pointing out the fact that last year Norway was actually a net importer of power, because we sold so much power when the prices were high and imported so much power when the prices were low that we were a net importer of power that year.
You're saying the moderator is wrong.
Well, I'm not going to say that. You said it. but the point is, Norwegian politicians have been really bad at explaining the possibilities hydropower gives us in a new global market for electrons. They've been terrible at it, because we have the largest reservoir of stable renewable power in Europe. And if you can, when that works together with wind and sun, which is actually mentioned in the new government platform, which is a new thing, mentioning sun. But when you get it to work together, that's when you actually increase the value of hydropower, which I think is fascinating that the politicians haven't taken the time to actually try to explain to the inhabitants. And instead they've let the rhetoric of we're selling it cheaply to foreigners win through. But I'm also, like you, very interested in the new Minister of Industry, because the vision, like I started out saying, I think the vision for how to complement renewables with industry to create new jobs for the onshore industry is there. While I obviously agree that replacing oil is difficult in terms of revenue, the point is we somehow still have to do it, because a few years ago there were 230,000 people working in the Norwegian petroleum sector. Last figure I saw was something along 190,000 people. So even if the oil prices stay high, it's just a fact that we are going to see less activity on the Norwegian shelf. So these people need some kind of job to transition to, and industry is quite nærliggende. Can't quite catch the English word right now, but my point is they need to transition both the rhetoric so that they get the people with them to realize that building more renewable power, and not just offshore but also onshore, I think, is the key to actually creating new jobs. Until you get to do that, you won't have any popular sentiment for more renewables in Norway. And unless you get popular sentiment, then you have populists who are opposing it.
Quickly before we change.
I think when it comes to wind power, it's interesting to see how also the environmental lobby has changed. Because in most countries you will have green parties and the environmental lobby that would think of hydropower, of wind power, solar power as something almost all positive. Whereas in the context of Norway, wind power is some of the most controversial issue you could pose to the Norwegian voters. Because now the policy is roughly that of there will be no new wind farms onshore, and if we can see the wind farms, we won't have them offshore either. And it will be interesting to see how the platform is also followed up in terms of those kind of issues, where it's either a long-term perspective that needs to be taken. There needs to be massive amounts of public money going into making it industrial feasible and economically feasible, not yet. Who knows when? But sun is part of the platform, and I think that's kudos to the government for that, because sun could be in the money in Norway virtually now, and without, or possibly without, the controversy attached to it.
Okay, any questions? to change the topic then. I'm going to jump over to COP26. The most important political meeting this year, I think we can agree on, in Glasgow in a couple of weeks. What steps do you guys think Støre will take to make sure that Norway pulls its weight when it comes to the international transition towards a green, circular economy? Because what we hear out of COP26 now is that the nations haven't, their ambitions are too low, and they need to put some really political muscle behind the negotiations at the start of COP26 to get it going. Well, how will Norway play this out? You know, we have our oil sector. We have a reputational issue, I would say, and this government is definitely pro-petrol industry, but we're still going to put our weight in COP26. How will this play out?
I'm tempted to say that he's going to go there and pledge more money. But I also think that, but seriously, the context of the COP right now is quite difficult, because you have gas prices in Europe, which means that Europe would love for Norway to export as much gas as we possibly can. You have, as far as I can remember, Biden basically just sidestepped John Kerry domestically, saying that, well, we need more petroleum resources in order to get down the energy prices. So we're kind of, the economic reality right now is that the price for renewables is so high, and the price for everything is so high, that we need more of everything, even including what emits carbon. That's a reality which is, has been lacking, I think, in the last COPs, which made them perhaps more positive. I think that the COP right now is going to be much more difficult than it has been in a long, long while, because there are so many conflicting interests.
How is this going to work? This is Boris Johnson's big project. What's going to happen, Richard?
Oh God! That's for like the last 5-10 years, my heart sinks every time. You know, when I meet a Norwegian, I say, "What's happening in the UK? What's going on with Brexit?" Don't ask me to explain Boris Johnson to you. I don't know. It's going to be a good sign of how good the British diplomacy skills are. Let's say. I don't know, on Norway, I'd just be interested. I don't know the answer to this. I hear more, and it may be more from the populist side. You know, what's the point of Norway doing anything? You know, we're just a small part. I think that's the danger for COP as a whole. If you basically put everything on China, saying China is the only, you know, they're the one that moves the needle on this, so what's the point of us doing it? I think it's deeply dishonest, but it obviously resonates quite broadly. I'd be interested to see, you know, I don't think that's obviously going to be Norway's official tactic, but how much, you know, some Norwegian politicians play up that aspect, I think would be interesting.
Not what you're saying.
It's
not what you're saying. We should just go, we need to go on like before, because
no, I'm not saying we should. I'm not making a normative statement.
But it's what's going to happen.
I think that until energy prices become more stable, and I think that until you actually see the theory that building enough renewables is going to drive down the price of energy in total, I think that until you actually see that, the COPs are going to become more difficult. Because right now, the simple fact is, if you kind of pledge to shut down more coal, more petroleum, more gas, the prices are going to go even higher. And then people are going to go out of business. They're going to lose their jobs. And that's just politically not viable at such a large scale.
I see you just... anyone here going to COP26? No? Okay.
They still have a travel ban within their companies. I think Norway would have two positions, and I think they're quite in line with what Odd is saying as well. Sorry. Well, on the one hand, Norway is going to have a pledge very high ambitions, even higher than previous governments have done before them. and on the second hand, that will be followed with more money. And the combination could be quite useful. And the combination is really touching upon what Richard is saying as well. It is important for filthy rich nations like Norway to both pledge very high ambitious targets and at the same time see that there is a north-south divide. There is a divide in terms of industrialization as well, and how far you've come as a country. We've been extremely fortunate in our energy mix because the oil and gas industries have given us the energy or the revenue streams, and the hydropower has basically given us renewable for as much as we need. But there is a sense of reality in this as well, because we now end up with pledging international targets that the Center Party would very much work against or be avidly against when it comes to local implementation. And that is a tough 4 years to come, because the targets international will be just ever higher. And the populist sentiment that part of the government has to its fingertips will grow even closer linked to gas prices filled at Vedum's or the finance minister's Ford SUV. And that's a gas guzzler.
Okay, short, and then move on.
Just moving back to the domestic emission cuts that Norway needs to make for the next 9 years, also creates the same dilemma for the government, especially for the Center Party when it comes to, if you look at if we're going to say that we're not going to touch oil and gas except electrification, and the same process is started by this government or the former government. Of course, transport is the key sector in Norway. And again, you also have the agriculture, but of course, the Center Party won't touch that in that sector for the next 4 years. So then you're left with transport, and you get the same kind of, you're faced with the same kind of energy populism that you see across Europe with high gas prices, the ordinary man and women in the street having to pay for this green transition. And then I think the whole, now it's the normal people's turn, or what's the slogan is in English? I think they're going to have several dilemmas going forward with CAP and also with cutting the Norwegian emissions here at home and not just abroad.
Average Joe.
Average Joe, yeah.
Yeah. In the platform, the government states that they're going to present a climate budget every year. That tells us how much do we need to cut in order to reach the goals we have pledged to cut, which will make it more visible how far we are lagging behind each year, which should, in theory at least, build the political basis for going tougher in with regulations, taxes, etc. What I'm curious is how that's actually going to play out in real life. I'm leaning towards your analysis, which is that it's going to be quite difficult, because you have the Center Party who basically will pledge or try to discount anything that touches upon agriculture, which is one of the large remaining sectors where you can actually make significant cuts. But that's going to hurt the agrarian interests, which are so closely linked with the Center Party that it's going to be quite interesting to see how they follow up on a budget that will show quite clearly if they lack progress.
So we have 3 more minutes. Parallel to the political discussions at COP, there are business events and business arrangement and business dinners and networking, all kinds of things. If you need tickets, come and ask me afterwards. Jonas Gahr Støre has to help Norwegian businesses through the green transition, and we need to discover and develop new businesses. You said it. We can't be only pushing money out there. We need to make business out of this. So what are the political tools you're going to use to help business go green? So you got 1 sentence each, maybe 2.
Let me quote a Norwegian Prime Minister not answering that question, but answering something completely else of hopefully of interest. And that is, my fear is you'll have a government that is willing to use money, but is not exactly certain what would lead to adequate results. So I think Vestre, our new minister, has a great potential to be a very effective minister. But I think the policy as it looks at the moment is a little like the industrial policies of France in the 50s, where they envision a large state picking out tomorrow's winners. Those policies failed. We've had them in Norway too, following up political grants to whoever they think as politicians will be securing jobs for tomorrow. Doesn't really work. And that is a real fear, and that's for something for business to have a say in as well, and give the good examples of what money could be spent at, and therefore also position your company as a potential receiver of grants and public money.
As a co-producer of this show, you got that much time. You won't. I'm going to rope you in. What are the green tools?
Smart taxation and smart regulations, a regulatory framework.
Same, and also strengthening Innovation Norge, Kona, and all the different new companies started the past few years to help businesses to initiate their new ideas and, of course, create new jobs. But it's going to be hard.
Final word.
Well, two things. One, I think, Norway is a rich country. You throw money at it, make sure it goes to the right place. I don't know whether that's true. The second thing, it'd be interesting, not the green shift, but the oil fund, is that going to be used to try and make a green shift internationally? I mean, the ambitions in the government program are quite world-leading in responsible investment, world-leading in nature and climate risk. If it lives up to that, that could be quite a powerful weapon. But also very interesting politically to follow.
That's going to be the final word. I'm going to stop now because you're going to have time to talk to these guys one by one if you want to. So we're going to have time to mingle. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for the panel. I just want to say that the British-Norwegian Chamber of Commerce has another event on the 25th of October. The future of green shipping, together with the Ship Owners Association. The room will be packed with ministers of all kinds. So just come and ask me if you want to come there. And if you want to go to COP26, I wasn't kidding. We have 2 more tickets, and there's a big business opportunity. Thank you very much, everybody.